The monitor didn't scream or beep dramatically, the way it does in movies when a life is ending. Instead, it surrendered with a soft, continuous hum, a single unwavering tone that seemed to fill every corner of the sterile room. That sound stretched into an eternity, and I stood there, frozen, my hand still wrapped around Eleanor's, feeling the last of her warmth fade into the cold, crisp sheets. My mother-in-law, Eleanor Vance, had just drawn her last breath, and I was utterly, profoundly alone. I was the sole witness in a room that should have been crowded with family. A nurse appeared in the doorway, a clipboard held like a shield against her chest. "Mrs. Vance? Are you okay?" Her eyes were filled with a practiced sort of kindness, the kind you develop after seeing this exact scene play out 1,000 times, but she hadn't lost all her humanity yet. I could only manage a numb nod, my throat feeling like it was packed with cotton. Words were a luxury I couldn't afford. Beyond her, the hospital corridor was a symphony of life. I could hear families laughing, a doctor getting a hug, the bright sound of a child's balloon squeaking against the ceiling. In the waiting area, an elderly couple sat holding hands, their faces etched with worry, but they were together. And here I was, trapped in a bubble of absolute silence that no one, not my husband, not his sister, had even tried to break. I called them. I finally managed to whisper, my voice sounding foreign and small. I called them again. My husband, Mark, and his sister, Stella. They kept saying they were on their way. The nurse's professional mask softened into genuine sympathy. She had been on duty for the past 3 days, a silent observer to my lonely vigil. She'd seen me pacing by the window, phone pressed to my ear. She'd heard the one-sided conversations, the messages I left that became more and more frantic. She'd witnessed the flicker of hope in my eyes every time I heard footsteps in the hall, only to see it die when they passed my door. "Goodbyes are hard for some people," she offered, a gentle platitude meant to soothe. But we both knew this wasn't about difficulty. It was about a choice, a deliberate decision not to be here. Through the thin wall, I could hear a burst of cheerful clapping from the next room. Someone was getting to go home. The stark contrast made the loneliness feel like a physical weight pressing down on my ribs, making it hard to breathe. I should call the funeral home, I stammered, fumbling for my phone. The screen lit up with notifications, 4 missed calls from my office, not a single one from Mark or Stella. "The doctor will need to handle the official paperwork first," the nurse said, gently guiding me toward the uncomfortable visitor's chair that had been my home for the last 72 hours. And there's something else. Eleanor left this for you. She pulled a sealed, cream-colored envelope from her uniform pocket. It was slightly wrinkled, as if it had been held tightly. My name, Clara, was written across the front in Eleanor's distinctive script, sharp, elegant, and precise, a style that had remained unshaken by her illness. "She made me promise I'd give it to you personally, only after she was gone," the nurse clarified. She was very clear about that. My fingers trembled as I took the envelope from her. In the 5 years I'd been married to Mark, Eleanor had always been polite, but there was a formal distance between us. We weren't the kind of family that shared deep secrets over coffee. What could she possibly need to tell me now, in death, that she couldn't say in life? I carefully broke the wax seal and slid out a single, folded sheet of paper. Taped to the top was an old, ornate brass key, slightly tarnished with age. Below it was an address I didn't recognize, for a town about an hour away. And beneath that, a single, chilling sentence that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. They never valued me. Now they will understand what it is to be forgotten. "Is everything all right?" the nurse asked, her brow furrowed with concern as she saw my expression change. "Yes," I lied, quickly folding the note and tucking it into my purse. Just some final thoughts she wanted to share. After signing a mountain of forms and collecting Eleanor's few personal belongings, a simple nightgown, her reading glasses, and a well-loved novel with a creased spine, I walked out of the hospital into a world that felt alien. The afternoon sun was painfully bright, almost offensive in its cheerfulness. The parking lot was a tableau of normal life. Families helping frail patients into cars, someone arriving with a bouquet of balloons, a new mother carefully buckling her baby into a car seat. Everyone else's world was moving forward, while mine felt like it had been suspended in time. I sat in my car for what felt like an hour, just staring at the steering wheel before I could summon the strength to turn the key in the ignition. In that heavy silence, I replayed Eleanor's final weeks, her gradual withdrawal, the long, quiet moments between us that were punctuated by cryptic remarks I dismissed as the side effects of her medication. I remembered the way she would sometimes just stare at me when she thought I wasn't looking, her gaze intense, as if she were trying to memorize every line of my face. Or maybe, I realized with a jolt, maybe she was making a judgment. The drive home was a blur. Stoplights, crosswalks, the mundane rhythm of the city all passed by without registering. I was carrying the weight of two things now, Eleanor's death and her mysterious, final command. At a red light, I checked my phone again. Still nothing. Not from Mark, not from Stella. I was hanging my coat in the hall when my phone finally rang. Mark's name illuminated the screen. A toxic cocktail of relief and white-hot anger churned in my stomach. "Hey, you," he said, his tone so casual it was like a slap in the face. "Thinking of heading home? Oh, and did you remember to grab groceries? We're out of pretty much everything." The sheer, unbelievable banality of his words made me grip the kitchen counter to steady myself. "Eleanor died today, Mark," I said, my voice flat and devoid of any emotion I was actually feeling. The line went dead silent for a few long seconds. Oh, he finally managed. Wow. When? When did that happen? 3:42 this afternoon, I replied, my voice miraculously steady, even as hot tears started to trace paths down my cheeks. You would have known that if you'd answered a single one of my calls. Another pause, this one filled with a defensive edge. Look, I was swamped. Meetings all day, you know how it gets. His voice then dropped, taking on a tone of false commiseration. Well, she was never the easiest person, was she? I ended the call. I didn't say goodbye. The house, our home, suddenly felt vast and suffocatingly empty. The kitchen table was littered with junk mail and magazines, the normal debris of a life that now felt utterly meaningless. And in my purse, Eleanor's note felt like it was burning a hole right through the leather. I didn't sleep that night. Mark came home late, mumbled something about a tough day, and crawled into our bed without another word. He was gone before the sun came up, off to some supposedly critical early meeting. I lay awake, watching the darkness outside my window slowly turn to gray, clutching the brass key from Eleanor's envelope so tightly in my palm that its edges dug into my skin. By 7 a.m., I knew what I had to do. I showered, dressed, and typed the address from Eleanor's note into my car's GPS. The route took me 45 miles out of the city, onto winding country roads that grew narrower with every turn, until I arrived at a gravel driveway almost completely swallowed by overgrown lilac bushes. A wrought iron gate, rusted and elegant, was hanging slightly ajar, almost as if it had been left open for me. Beyond it stood a small, weathered cottage. Its once white paint was peeling away, revealing the gray, aged wood beneath. Wild climbing roses had taken over an entire wall, their thorny branches scraping against the warped window frames. It was a place that looked like it had been deliberately forgotten by time. The key slid into the tarnished lock with a satisfying click. I pushed the heavy door open and it groaned in protest, revealing a space that was a perfect time capsule. Dust motes danced like fairies in the shafts of sunlight that pierced through the gaps in the drawn curtains. Books, hundreds of them, filled shelves that lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Stacks of photo albums were piled high on a wooden coffee table. And there, Placed squarely in the center of the dusty kitchen table was another cream-colored envelope. This one had a name typed on it. To be opened upon my death by my attorney, Evelyn Reed. I stepped all the way inside, the door swinging shut behind me with a soft thud. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, dried lavender, and something else. Resolve. As the dust settled around me, I understood. I was standing in Eleanor's real home, not the cold, sterile room at the assisted living facility where Mark and Stella had insisted she move. This was the place where she had kept her heart, and for reasons I was only just beginning to grasp, she had chosen me, and only me, to be the keeper of its secrets. I sat at that kitchen table in Eleanor's hidden cottage for what must have been an hour, just staring at the second envelope, the one addressed to her lawyer. The layers of dust on every surface didn't speak of neglect, but of preservation. This place had been waiting, just like the message in my hand. The name on the envelope was Evelyn Reed, attorney at law, with an office address in the city's downtown legal district. My heart hammered against my ribs as I found the firm's number online and dialed, the rings echoing loudly in the silent cottage. A crisp, professional voice answered on the third ring. Reed Legal Associates. My name is Clara Vance, I began, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. My mother-in-law, Eleanor Vance, passed away yesterday. She left an envelope for a Miss Evelyn Reed. There was a brief, knowing pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Vance. Yes, I've been expecting you to call. The lawyer's tone shifted from professional to something warmer, more personal. I am so very sorry for your loss. Eleanor was a truly remarkable woman. Would you be able to come to my office tomorrow morning at 10? There are some important matters we must discuss. Of course, I agreed without hesitation. Should I bring the envelope she left? Please do, she said. And Mrs. Vance. Eleanor was extremely specific in her instructions. She requested that all named beneficiaries be physically present for the reading of her will. That will include her son, Mark, and her daughter, Stella. My stomach clenched into a tight knot. They have to be there. In person? I'm afraid so. Eleanor was very, very insistent on that particular point. That evening, I drove back to the house I shared with Mark. I found him on the sofa, feet up, watching a sports recap show on full volume. He didn't even look up when I walked in. "Where have you been all day?" he asked, his eyes glued to the screen. I stood in the living room entryway just watching him. He had Eleanor's strong jawline, but none of the character that had been etched into her features. "I've been handling your mother's final arrangements," I said, my voice cold, since no one else seemed to have the time to show up while she was actually dying. That finally got his attention. He hit the mute button on the remote. "Oh, don't start with the guilt trip, Clara. Mom and I had our issues. You know that. It wasn't a simple relationship." Her lawyer called me, I continued, steamrolling right over his flimsy excuses. "We need to be at her office tomorrow morning at 10 for the reading of her will, you, me, and Stella." He let out a short, humorless laugh. What will? Mom had nothing left but a mountain of medical debt. Nevertheless, her lawyer, Miss Reed, insists that we all attend. She said Eleanor was very specific. Mark rolled his eyes but gave a dismissive shrug. "Fine, whatever. I'll call Stella and tell her to be there." The drive downtown the next morning was thick with a tense, irritated silence. We met Stella on the sidewalk outside the modest brick building that housed Reed Legal Associates. She was leaning against the wall, finishing a cigarette, her face, so much like Mark's, pinched with annoyance. "This is a complete waste of time," she grumbled, grinding the cigarette out with the heel of her expensive boot. I had to take unpaid time off for this charade. We walked into the building as a trio, a family in name only. Ms. Reed's office was compact but impeccably organized. Dark walnut furniture, neatly arranged law books, and a single perfect white orchid blooming on the windowsill. The lawyer herself was a reflection of her surroundings. Silver hair pulled back in a sleek bun, an impeccably tailored suit, and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take our measure the moment we walked in. Two older women were already seated in the plush visitors' chairs. I recognized them as Brenda and Joyce, two friends of Eleanor's from her old book club whom I'd met once or twice at holiday dinners years ago. They offered me a polite, sad smile, but they looked just as confused about their presence as we were. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Ms. Reed began once we were all seated. As Eleanor Vance's legal counsel for the past 2 decades, I have been entrusted with executing her final will and testament. Mark made a great show of looking at his watch. Stella began tapping her foot impatiently, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Let us proceed," Ms. Reed said, putting on a pair of sleek reading glasses and opening a handsome leather-bound portfolio. "This is the last will and testament of Eleanor Catherine Vance, revised and notarized 3 months ago." She started to read through the formal legal jargon. Mark and Stella exchanged a look of profound boredom. Brenda and Joyce sat with their hands folded in their laps, respectfully attentive. I just clutched my purse, feeling the outline of the 2 envelopes Eleanor had left me. "Moving on to the distribution of assets," Ms. Reed announced, her voice even, "to my son, Mark Vance." Mark physically straightened in his chair. "I leave my forgiveness, though he has done nothing to earn it." The air in the room went still. Stella's foot stopped its frantic tapping. "To my daughter, Stella Vance, I leave my wedding band, which you always so admired. May it serve as a reminder that some promises are meant to be kept." Stella's face flushed, a deep, mottled red. "To my dear friends, Brenda Clark and Joyce Miller, for the kindness and companionship you showed me in my final years when others could not be bothered, I leave a sum of $10,000 each." The 2 women gasped, looking at each other in stunned surprise. And finally, Ms. Reed took a deliberate breath. "To my daughter-in-law, Clara Vance, I leave the entirety of my remaining estate. This includes my primary residence, the property located at 112 Aspen Grove, as well as all associated bank accounts, investment portfolios, life insurance policies, and all personal effects contained within." The silence shattered. "What?" Stella's voice was a knife, sharp and shrill. "That's insane." Mark shot to his feet, his face a mask of disbelief. "There has to be a mistake. Clara barely even knew my mother. Ms. Reed was the picture of calm. There is no mistake, Mr. Vance. Your mother was of perfectly sound mind and body when she enacted these changes." "Changes?" Mark demanded. "What changes? When did this happen?" "Your mother revised her will on April 12th of this year. It was shortly after she received her terminal diagnosis from her oncologist." Mark spun around to face me, his eyes narrowed with raw accusation. "You knew about this. You must have. What did you do, Clara? Did you manipulate a sick old woman? Take advantage of her while she was on medication?" "I had no idea," I whispered, the shock genuine. But then a memory surfaced, sharp and clear. Eleanor asking me to drive her downtown for an appointment back in the spring. She'd said it was just to finalize her treatment plan. I had waited in the car for over an hour, reading a book. I never even thought to ask where she was going. "How convenient for you," Stella spat from her chair. "The whole devoted daughter-in-law act really paid off, didn't it?" "Well, you won't get away with it. We'll contest this." Mom was clearly not in her right mind. Ms. Reed cleared her throat, recapturing the room's attention. I anticipated such a reaction. In fact, Eleanor did as well. She slid a thick document across the polished table. "This is a full psychiatric evaluation, conducted by a court-appointed specialist 1 week before she revised the will. It certifies, in no uncertain terms, her complete mental competency. She also recorded a video statement explicitly outlining the reasons for her decisions. It will, of course, be provided to the court should a challenge be filed." Mark's face had gone ashen. "How much?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "How much did she leave?" Ms. Reed's eyes met mine. The cottage and its land are valued at approximately $400,000. The investment accounts total just over $350,000, and the life insurance policies amount to $200,000. Eleanor lived a frugal life, but she and her husband were very wise investors. Brenda and Joyce were now looking at me, not with shock, but with something akin to respect, or maybe it was vindication on Eleanor's behalf. "This is all legally binding and ironclad," Ms. Reed stated firmly. "My office will begin the process of transferring all assets to Mrs. Vance's name immediately. Now, if you'll all excuse us, I need a private word with my client." After Mark and Stella stormed out of the office, followed by the two bewildered but grateful friends, Ms. Reed turned to me. She handed me a third cream-colored envelope. "Eleanor asked me to give you this after the reading was complete. She said you would understand what to do." Alone again in the quiet of her office, my hands shaking, I opened it. Inside was another single sheet of Eleanor's stationery. Her precise, elegant script formed just one final paragraph. "Forgive no one. Let them beg, let them kneel, and when they do, you are to smile, turn around, and walk away." I folded the note with deliberate care and placed it in my purse with the others. When I finally looked up, Ms. Reed was watching me with an expression of profound understanding. "She chose you for a reason, Clara," the lawyer said softly. "Not just as her heir, she chose you to be her voice." In that moment, the full weight of it all landed on me. Eleanor hadn't just left me money and property. She had bequeathed me something far more potent, the power she never felt she had in her own life. And with that power came a mission, one that I knew would test every fiber of my being. Outside, Mark was waiting by the car, his face a thundercloud of confusion, betrayal, and raw fury. Stella was nowhere to be seen. As I approached, I felt a new strength settle in my bones. "I'm staying at the cottage tonight," I said calmly as we pulled into our driveway. "I need to start sorting through Eleanor's things." Mark shot me a sideways glance, the gears of calculation already turning in his head, visibly replacing the anger. "Of course, honey, whatever you need. This must all be so overwhelming for you." The abrupt, sickening shift in his tone made my skin crawl. Without another word, I went inside, packed an overnight bag, and drove back to Eleanor's secret home. My home now. As twilight settled over the countryside, the cottage felt different. Less like a place of abandonment, more like a place of silent expectation. I lit the old lamps, their soft glow pushing back the shadows. I swept away the thickest cobwebs and made myself a cup of tea in the time capsule kitchen. On a shelf beside the stone fireplace, I found them, a row of leather-bound journals, each meticulously labeled with a year in Eleanor's perfect handwriting, spanning nearly 3 decades. I chose the most recent one and curled up in a deep armchair by the window. As the crickets began their nightly song outside, I opened it to the first page. "Benjamin has been gone 7 years today," Eleanor had written. Mark called. The first time in 4 months. He needed money to cover a bad investment. I sent it, of course. I am a fool who still believes a mother's love is meant to be unconditional. Ben would be so disappointed in me. I read for hours, until my eyes burned and the words blurred on the page. Journal after journal painted a portrait of a woman I had never been allowed to truly know. A woman who was sharp, witty, observant, and increasingly heartbreakingly alone. Eleanor had documented everything: Mark's constant and escalating requests for money, Stella's cruel, cutting remarks about her outdated opinions or embarrassing clothes. The way friends slowly drifted away after her diagnosis made it too difficult to socialize. I found an entry from just 6 months ago. "Called Mark 3 times this week. He's screening my calls, I know it. When he finally picked up, I could hear a football game blaring in the background. He claimed he was swamped at work, but would try to visit soon. That was in February. It is now June." But the most gut-wrenching entries were about the holidays she spent alone, made a small roast chicken anyway, set the table for 4, more out of habit than hope. I knew no one would come. Stella sent a text message. They decided to spend Christmas with her boyfriend's family in Aspen. Mark didn't even bother with an excuse this year. I slept fitfully in Eleanor's bed that night, her lonely words echoing in my dreams. The next morning, under the bed in the master bedroom, I discovered a large, cedar-lined chest. It was filled with bundles of letters tied with faded silk ribbons, the correspondence between Eleanor and her husband Ben over their 40-year marriage. One letter in particular, dated just a few weeks before Ben's death, made me stop breathing. My dearest Eleanor. Ben had written, his handwriting shaky but clear. The doctors say my time is short, so I must say what needs to be said. Our children have become strangers to us. It didn't happen in one big dramatic moment, but in 1,000 tiny cuts, 1,000 small betrayals. When I'm gone, you will want to leave them everything. It is what mothers do. I'm asking you, begging you, not to. Do not reward those who left us to fend for ourselves in our hour of greatest need. Remember what we built together, Eleanor. Do what is right, not what is easy. Do it even if it breaks your heart. I carefully placed the letter back in its bundle. I finally understood the seeds of Eleanor's final defiant act. This wasn't the bitter lashing out of a lonely old woman. These were the carefully considered actions of someone who had finally been forced to accept a devastating truth. Some bonds, even those of blood, simply aren't worth preserving once they've been stretched to the breaking point. My phone buzzed. It was Mark. I stared at his name for a long moment before answering. "Hey," he said, his voice dripping with an unnatural, syrupy cheerfulness. "Just checking in on you. I made your favorite lasagna for dinner if you feel like coming home." "I'll be staying here for another night or two," I replied, my voice cool. "There's a lot to go through." "No problem at all," he said, smooth as silk. "I was just thinking, maybe we could take a weekend trip soon. Just the two of us, like we used to. A chance to reconnect after all this." The transparent manipulation churned my stomach. "Maybe," I said, offering him nothing. "I'll let you know." Over the next week, Mark's transformation was as fascinating as it was repulsive. He called me every single day, asking solicitous questions about my well-being. On the nights I did go back to our house, he'd cleaned everything, cooked elaborate meals, and even brought home flowers. It was a flawless performance, but it was hollow. His eyes were always calculating, constantly watching me for any sign that his strategy was working. Then the official court summons arrived. "Petition to contest validity of will," the header proclaimed in stark, bold letters. Stella, true to her word, had filed a formal challenge. The document was filled with vile allegations, painting me as a conniving opportunist who had systematically isolated a vulnerable Eleanor and poisoned her against her own loving children. My hands were shaking as I called Miss Reed. "I was expecting this," she said, her voice a beacon of calm in my storm. "Stella's attorney is a bottom feeder. Don't you worry, Clara. Eleanor prepared for this." 2 days before the scheduled hearing, Miss Reed had me come to her office to review our defense. She placed a small digital voice recorder on her desk. "Eleanor made these recordings herself during her final months," she explained. "With her full knowledge and consent, of course." She pressed the play button. Eleanor's voice, frail but crystal clear, filled the silent office. My daughter Stella visited today, the first time in 8 months. She spent 12 minutes complaining about her boss, 20 minutes scrolling on her phone, and then, when I mentioned my latest scan results, she asked if she could borrow my mother's diamond earrings for a wedding. When I said no, she called me a selfish old woman and left. Ms. Reed stopped the recording. There are dozens more, just like that. She was documenting their neglect long before she changed her will. That, combined with her psychiatric evaluation and testimony from her doctor, means Stella doesn't stand a chance. The courtroom was small, stuffy, and airless. Stella sat next to her attorney, a nervous-looking man with thinning hair who couldn't stop shuffling his papers. Mark sat in the row directly behind them, a separate party but a clear ally. When I walked in with Ms. Reed, Mark's face twisted into a brief snarl of pure hatred before he smoothed it back into his mask of concerned neutrality. The hearing was over in less than an hour. The judge listened, his face an impassive slate, as Stella's lawyer presented his flimsy, speculative case. When it was Ms. Reed's turn, she methodically, surgically dismantled every single accusation with medical records, financial documents, expert testimony, and finally Eleanor's own voice from the grave. The judge dismissed the challenge without a second thought and ordered Stella to pay all court costs. The fallout was swift. A small local news blog picked up the story. People in their social circle talked. Suddenly, Stella's friends were always busy. The upscale boutique where she worked part-time suggested she take some personal time off until things blow over. Her new boyfriend vanished from her social media feed. Mark's carefully constructed charade of the devoted husband finally shattered that night. When I went back to the house to pack the rest of my things, he was waiting for me, a half-empty glass of whiskey in his hand. "Are you happy now?" he sneered, all pretense of kindness gone. "You managed to turn my own mother against me, even from beyond the grave." "Eleanor did that all on her own, Mark," I replied quietly, placing a box by the door. "She just finally found someone willing to witness it." "You think you're so damn clever," he hissed, taking a step closer to me, playing the perfect caring daughter-in-law while you were secretly plotting to steal her entire estate. In that ugly, drunken moment, I saw him with absolute clarity. Not as my husband, not even as Eleanor's son. I saw him as the weak, selfish, entitled man that both Eleanor and I had finally painfully come to recognize. The revelation wasn't a lightning strike. It was just the final missing piece of a puzzle, clicking quietly into place. "I'm moving to the cottage permanently," I said, stepping around him to grab another box. "You can keep this house for now. Our lawyers can discuss the terms of our divorce." "Divorce?" His face slackened, contorting with genuine, pathetic shock. "You can't be serious. After everything I've done for you?" The question hung in the air between us, so profoundly absurd that I almost laughed. Instead, I just walked up the stairs to finish packing, Eleanor's final command echoing in my mind. Forgive no one. Let them beg. Let them kneel. The cottage became my sanctuary as the divorce proceedings dragged on. I filled my days sorting through the tangible pieces of Eleanor's life, discovering new layers of her personality with every box of photographs and every drawer of handwritten recipes I opened. At night, I slept soundly in her old bedroom, comforted by the faded floral wallpaper and the steady, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. About 3 weeks after I'd officially moved out, Mark showed up on my doorstep. His usual confident swagger was gone, replaced by a practiced, hollow humility that never quite reached his eyes. He stood there with his hands shoved in his pockets, his shoulders slumped. "Can we talk for a minute?" he asked, trying to peer around me into the cottage I was now so protective of. I stepped outside onto the porch, closing the door firmly behind me. Eleanor's space was not for him. "The bank called," he started, after a long, awkward silence. They're calling in some of my business loans. Without Mom's name co-signing." He trailed off, his gaze fixed on a point just over my shoulder. "And?" I prompted, my voice flat. I refused to make this easy for him. "And I'm in a really tight spot, Clara. I just need a little help to get through this. $5,000 would cover this month's mortgage and the car payment." I just looked at him, really looked at the face I had woken up next to for 5 years, the face I thought I knew. "Your mother left her entire estate to me," I stated evenly. "You left her with nothing. I am simply honoring her wishes." His mask of humility cracked. "She's dead, Clara. What difference does it make to her now?" This isn't about Mom anymore. This is about you being petty and vindictive." "No, Mark," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "This is about consequences. Eleanor finally saw you for who you are, and now, so do I." As he stormed off to his car, muttering curses under his breath, I didn't feel a shred of triumph. I just felt a quiet, solid certainty that I was doing exactly what Eleanor had asked of me. Stella was next. She didn't come in person. Instead, she left a rambling, frantic voicemail on my phone at 2 a.m. "My landlord is threatening to evict me," she slurred, her words thick with alcohol. "I lost my job because of you and that stupid court case. This is all your fault, Clara. The least you can do is help me out." I listened to the message once, then deleted it. The cottage itself seemed to affirm my choices. Each time I held my ground, the old floorboards would settle with a soft creak, a sound I chose to interpret as approval. As spring bloomed into a vibrant summer, I began to breathe new life into the old house, guided by the hopes I'd found in Eleanor's journals. I always wanted this place to be filled with conversation and laughter she had written years ago. Ben and I used to dream of hosting parties for our friends, for the whole community, but then life happened, and we just never did. I hired a team of local contractors to rebuild the sagging front porch and modernize the ancient plumbing. I painted the walls in warm, welcoming shades of gold and sage green, and had the worn, threadbare carpets torn out to reveal beautiful hardwood floors beneath. The final touch was a hand-carved wooden sign I commissioned to hang above the front door: Eleanor's Embrace. With a portion of the inheritance, Miss Reed helped me establish a non-profit foundation. We officially opened the doors on what would have been Eleanor's 73rd birthday, offering the small town a place for grief support groups, elder companionship programs, and free weekly community dinners. "Oh, Eleanor would have adored this," Brenda said, her eyes misty as she toured the beautifully renovated space. She and Joyce had become my steadfast allies, visiting often during the renovation to share stories that painted a vivid picture of the vibrant woman Eleanor had been before loneliness and illness had stolen her light. She was always the first person to organize a meal train when someone in town got sick, Joyce added, carefully adjusting a framed photo of a smiling Eleanor that I'd hung in the entryway. "Remember how she used to teach those cooking classes at the church? She had a gift for making everyone feel like they were family." The bitter irony of that statement was not lost on me. Eleanor had spent her life building family with strangers because her own children had cast her aside. But through the foundation's work, her story began to change. People in town started to speak of her differently, not as the sad, reclusive woman who died alone, but as the generous, unseen benefactor whose legacy was now weaving the community closer together. 6 months after Eleanor's death, Mark made his most audacious move yet. He invited me to lunch at our old favorite restaurant, a quiet Italian place where we had celebrated anniversaries and birthdays in a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. He arrived early and secured our old table by the window. The moment I sat down, he reached across the table and took both of my hands in his. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Clara," he began, his voice low and intensely earnest. "A lot of soul-searching. I know I wasn't the husband you deserved, and I wasn't the son my mother needed me to be." I gently slid my hands out from under his, watching him, waiting. "I want us to start over," he said, his eyes pleading. "Renew our vows, rebuild what we lost." He pulled a small, black velvet box from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table between us. "I found Mom's engagement ring when I was going through some of her things. Before all this, I know she would have wanted you to have it." The lie was so stunningly blatant it almost took my breath away. Eleanor's actual engagement ring was safely locked away in my jewelry box at the cottage. It was one of the few precious items she'd kept with her at the assisted living facility, and it had been returned to me along with her other effects on the day she died. "That's not her ring, Mark," I said softly. His composure flickered for a split second before he recovered. "Well, It's very similar. The point is, I want to make this right. Please, meet me at Riverside Park on Saturday. We can talk about our future." I agreed, more out of a morbid curiosity than any sense of conflict. The park was a riot of autumn color when I arrived that Saturday. Mark was waiting for me by the old stone bridge where he had proposed, his flair for the dramatic apparently still intact. He'd even brought a bottle of champagne and 2 crystal flutes. "You came," he said, a wave of relief washing over his face. "I did," I said. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "And I brought something for you, too." His face lit up, a greedy little spark in his eyes as he reached for it, no doubt expecting some legal document signing the money back to him. What he found instead were our divorce papers, already signed and dated by me. "What is this?" he demanded, though the words were spelled out clearly on the first page. "It's exactly what it looks like. You made your choices a long time ago, Mark. Now I'm finally making mine." "You can't do this," he sputtered, his face turning an ugly shade of red. "Not after everything I've done to try and make things right." "You haven't done anything to make things right," I corrected him calmly. "You've done everything you can think of to get your hands on Eleanor's money. There's a very big difference." In a fit of childish rage, he ripped the papers in half and threw them into the river. It didn't matter. My lawyer had the originals. "This isn't over," he shouted at my back as I walked away. But it was. 2 days later, an email from Stella landed in my inbox. The entitled anger was gone, replaced by a carefully crafted syrupy apology and a desperate plea for help. "I've hit rock bottom, Clara," she wrote. "I know I don't deserve it, but I am begging you for help. Even a small loan would make all the difference right now." I thought about her words, and I thought about Eleanor's final letter. Then I scanned that letter, the one that read, "Forgive no one," and attached it to my reply. I wrote nothing else. Then I blocked her email address. That evening, I walked through Eleanor's embrace after the last of the volunteers had gone home. The main room still held the warm, lingering echoes of the day's chatter. A group of seniors sharing old stories over tea, a young widower finding a moment of comfort in a support group, the sound of children's laughter from the after-school tutoring program. For the first time since Eleanor's death, a genuine, profound sense of peace settled over me. I wasn't just Mark's wife anymore. I wasn't just Eleanor's wronged daughter-in-law. I was my own person, standing on my own 2 feet, carrying forward the legacy of another woman who had been silenced, but who had refused to let her story end in quiet defeat. I ran my fingers along the spines of Eleanor's journals, which now had a place of honor on a special shelf in the community room. "I get it now," I whispered to the quiet, empty room. "This is what you wanted all along." A year passed, each day turning over like a page in one of Eleanor's journals. Sometimes slowly and quietly, other times in a dizzying blur of activity, but always moving forward, always adding to a story that was still being written. Eleanor's embrace flourished in ways I never could have imagined. What had started as a simple community space was now the vibrant heart of the town. We had Monday afternoon art classes for seniors, Tuesday evening grief support circles, and Wednesday community dinners where strangers became neighbors over plates of lasagna and slices of apple pie. The cottage that had once stood as a monument to loneliness now pulsed with warmth and life. On the first anniversary of Eleanor's passing, we unveiled a large mural in the entrance hall. A local artist had worked from the old black and white photos I'd found in Eleanor's albums, creating a beautiful portrait of Eleanor and Ben in their youth. In the painting, they were sitting together under the huge oak tree that still stood behind the cottage, young and full of life. Eleanor's head thrown back in a joyous laugh as Ben gazed at her with pure, undisguised love. "It captures them perfectly," Joyce remarked at the unveiling, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "That's exactly how they were before, before everything changed." that everything hung in the air between us, unspoken but understood. Ben's death, the slow and painful abandonment by their children, Eleanor's long years of isolation. The mural, however, was about celebrating the beginning of their story, not the sad end. I found myself smiling. The local paper ran a front-page story on the anniversary with the headline, "Eleanor's Embrace Marks 1 year of community service." The article detailed all our programs and quoted several participants who spoke about the difference the center had made in their lives. My phone buzzed with a text from Miss Reed. "Eleanor would be so proud," it read, "not just of the center, but of you." The following week, I was invited to be a keynote speaker at a regional conference on elder care and community engagement. The organizer had visited Eleanor's Embrace during an open house and had been deeply moved by our mission. "We would be honored if you would share your story," she'd said over the phone. "So many seniors are facing the crisis of isolation. Your perspective could be invaluable." Standing at that podium a month later, looking out at a sea of faces, social workers, healthcare professionals, community organizers, I felt Eleanor's spirit with me. "My mother-in-law died alone," I began, my voice clear and steady despite the lump forming in my throat. Not because she didn't have a family, but because her family chose not to be a family to her. I told Eleanor's story, changing the names and softening the harshest details, focusing instead on the insidious way elder isolation takes root. It doesn't happen in a single dramatic event, but in 1,000 small, cumulative betrayals, unanswered phone calls, postponed visits, dismissive responses to genuine pain. The community center we've built isn't just about providing services or activities, I explained, my passion carrying me forward. It's about the simple, profound act of bearing witness to each other's lives. It's about creating a space where people feel seen and heard, especially when their own families have made them feel invisible. After the speech, a long line of people formed, all wanting to speak with me. They shared their own stories, of parents whose children had drifted away, of elderly neighbors who went days without speaking to another soul. "Have you ever considered writing a book?" one woman asked, pressing her business card into my hand. "I'm a senior editor at Meridian Publishing. Your message needs to reach a wider audience." That night, back in my quiet hotel room, I opened my laptop and started to write. The words poured out of me, as if they had been waiting just below the surface for permission to be heard. I wrote about Eleanor, about her journals, about the incredible woman I only came to know after she was gone. I wrote about my grief, not just for her death, but for the friendship we might have had if only I had seen her loneliness sooner. But as the manuscript grew over the next few months, it began to change. The early chapters, steeped in loss and anger, slowly gave way to something else entirely: hope. I wrote about Eleanor's Embrace, about the new family that had formed within its walls, about the incredible healing that happens when people simply decide to show up for one another. I titled the book, "The Letter That Set Me Free," a tribute to the final defiant act that had completely altered the course of my life. My editor loved it, calling it a powerful and timely examination of family, obligation, and the courage to build a new life from the ashes of disappointment. News travels, especially in a small town. I heard through Joyce that Mark had moved to another state and remarried just 6 months after our divorce was finalized. He was working at a car dealership, a significant step down from the business he'd been forced to sell when his loans were called in. His new wife was young, barely 24. Apparently, they're already trying for a baby, Joyce reported over one of our weekly tea sessions. I just nodded, feeling nothing but a distant sort of pity for the young woman who had no idea what she'd just signed up for. Stella's path had been different. Town gossip said she was working the graveyard shift at a 24-hour diner out on the highway, serving coffee to truckers and insomniacs. Brenda had seen her there once. She said she looked thinner, paler, her usual sharp-edged personality worn down to nothing. She looked right through me, Brenda had said, shaking her head. Wouldn't even make eye contact when she brought the coffee. I never commented on these updates. I never expressed satisfaction or regret. Eleanor's final instruction, smile, turn, and walk away, had become my guiding principle. Not as an act of cruelty, but as a quiet acknowledgement that some bridges, once burned, are meant to stay that way to keep you from walking back into the fire. The book was published in the spring, just in time for the second anniversary of Eleanor's embrace. The launch party held in the center's main hall was packed with people from the community. As I signed copies and accepted hugs and congratulations, I thought about how differently my life could have turned out. I could have been left with nothing but a broken heart and a house full of bitter memories. Instead, I had this, a purpose, a community, a new life built on a foundation of truth and respect. The breeze picked up, rustling the leaves of the old oak tree outside and sending a shower of pink petals from the rose bushes dancing at my feet. In that moment, I felt a sense of completion so profound it was almost overwhelming. The past, with all its sharp edges and painful betrayals, was finally where it belonged, behind me. The future stretched out ahead, built not on the fragile scaffolding of obligation, but on the solid ground of my own quiet strength. Eleanor's true inheritance hadn't been the money or the cottage. It had been permission. Permission to define my own life on my own terms. Permission to identify toxic relationships and walk away without an ounce of guilt. Permission to take the rubble of disappointment and build something beautiful and meaningful from it. As twilight deepened over the valley, I made my way back to the cottage, my sanctuary and my home. Tomorrow, a new day would dawn at Eleanor's embrace. There would be new stories to hear, new connections to forge. The work would go on, growing and evolving in ways I couldn't even imagine yet. And I like to think that somewhere, Eleanor was watching. Not with bitterness, but with the quiet, satisfied smile of a woman whose final act of defiance had created ripples of goodness that reached far beyond her own life. That, I finally understood, was the real meaning of legacy. It's not what you leave behind in a will. It's what continues to grow from the seeds you plant. Eleanor had planted seeds of truth in the barren soil of betrayal. And against all odds, something truly beautiful had blossomed. If this jaw-dropping inheritance surprise had you gasping, smash that like button right now. My favorite part was when Clara handed Mark the divorce papers at the same park where he once proposed. Talk about poetic justice. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful stories of standing your ground. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. End of story.